Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Though a bird can't fly, that doesn't mean it never will. By Phalanx. What might have been if Kuina had survived her fall down the dojo stairs? She and Zoro strive to become the greatest swordsman in the world, allegiances and promises notwithstanding. Adios.
Rainbase, the city of dreams. Present day. As a rule, the streets of Rainbase never fell silent. Set in the middle of the desert, the city of dreams was a contradiction in itself. On one hand you had the vast empty desert, devoid of resources. And on the other, you had a city centered around nothing else but the pursuit of every pleasure. Throughout the year, vast numbers of people thronged the pleasure town, often to emerge poorer but happier. Sometimes they also emerge poorer and unhappier, but that is to be expected also. Today, however, the streets of Rainbase were even less silent than usual, namely because they were flooded with squadrons of marines chasing after a handful of pirates. Roronoa Zoro was one of the aforementioned pirates, and he was not pleased about it. After days of nothing but sand, it had been a relief to just sit still. Pulling Chopper along on the sled hadn't really been taxing, but even his calloused hands had begun to feel the chafing of the rope after days of trudging through the burning wasteland. So what Zoro was really feeling sour about was the fact that the first chance they got, their stupid captain and sharpshooter just had to go wander into a restaurant where two marine officers were sitting with their eyes wide open, apparently waiting for them. Actually, he wasn't sure about the waiting for them with eyes wide open part, but given the tiny window of time there had been between them arriving and them getting into trouble, there couldn't really be any other possibility. That one of them turned out to the invincible smoke captain from Logia Town just had to be icing on the cake. And that would make the fact that right now, the other officer running after him was that woman swordsman from Logia Town, the silly little sugar flowers on top of the icing. The only thing that could top this would be if Kuina were to appear and join in. Fortunately, she was nowhere in sight as they split up and ran for the casino. Sanji did not like fighting women. In a way he supposed he had deserved it when he had turned and challenged the pursuing marines by saying that, without that smoke bastard they were nothing. How was he supposed to know that she had been behind them, and had stepped out to challenge him? Well, not so much challenge, but brandish a sword and demand to know what Luffy was up to. This caused Sanji no small amount of confusion. The last time he'd checked, he had been sure there was some sort of connection between that female swordsman marine, the other one, from Nanohana, and Zoro, but it looked as though she was after Luffy now. Perhaps an old enemy they'd met back in East Blue before he joined the crew. He really should have asked one of them about it, but that damn swordsman had been just so touchy about the topic he'd left it alone. Of course, explaining to her that their group had split up and he really wasn't in a position to say where their captain was at the moment did nothing to pacify her. She'd unleashed some sort of slashing attack that had given him an impromptu hair trim, and that was with him anticipating it and dodging. Shit, she's better than that shitty Marimo. Of course he might be biased, since nothing in the world would induce him to admit that shitty swordsman was good for anything. Seam splitter. He managed to kick her sword and redirect the attack, but the monument behind him split in half. Definitely deadly, but still kind of cute. Sanji did wonder though, as he dodged desperately, unable to bring himself to attack, how those damned marines had tracked them all the way to Rainbase, and how they had gotten here. Nanohana, 1 week ago. In the map room of the little twin-masted brig, Captain Smoker was deep in conversation with his navigator. So about the intrusion? Smoker prompted, ignoring the fact that Briggs was pointedly coughing at the buildup of smoke in the confined space. Yes, we scared them off. Otherwise, we hadn't been here, I'm pretty sure something bad would have happened. The twitchy navigator was drumming his long fingers against the table. I think that prisoner from Runes had something to do with it too. This isn't normal behavior. Does it make any sense for your average citizen to try and invade a marine ship? No, of course it doesn't. But something about this country is wrong. As in, I was here years ago and it wasn't like this. The whole place feels wrong now, but I can't put my finger on how. Did you notice anything else? Of course I did. Those men had a tattoo on their arms. I could swear that the insignia matches that of those ships we saw earlier. Baroque works. Our initial theory was that they were acting as supply runners for the rebel army, but so far we haven't found any information confirming it as such, Smoker grunted. Still, I agree with you. Something about this whole situation stinks. You actually agree with me? Don't sound so surprised, Smoker drawled. You're the one with experience in this part of the Grand Line, Briggs, but that wasn't the main reason I brought you along. If there's one thing I know you're good at, it's gathering information, and I think it's time we made use of it. Briggs didn't look pleased. I was hoping we could avoid that. Well, get used to the idea. You're probably the only one able to carry out what I have in mind. How about Rainbase? Who's going to? Oh bloody hell. You're going to get that backwater East Blue fisherman to take over navigation, aren't you? He's going to get you lost. You might as well stick to Shigi or that blind girl at helm and hope for the bee. At this point, Smoker's glare cut him off. I would show more respect for Tashigi and my subordinates if I were you, Briggs. The captain's smoke output was increasing, a warning sign. Briggs backed down remarkably quickly after that. All right then. Tell them not to throw too big a party when I'm gone, he groused. Well, we made it, acting navigator Piers announced proudly as the marine brig sailed up the Sandora River. As Mr. Briggs would say. Here he did a passable impression of their absent navigator's deep baritone. We made it in record time, as in, the fastest time it's taken to sail from Nanohana on the record. Ever, ha ha ha. Well, maybe without the ha 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 part, because Mr. Briggs never laughs, but the record time thing's really what he normally says, ain't it? More navigation and less conversation, Piers, was the unenthusiastic reminder from Tashigi. While she liked the man and she suspected Smoker actually did too. But she could tell his chattery tendencies did get on the captain's nerves, and they all really preferred their captain in his amiable moods. Yes ma'am. Sorry ma'am. Despite Briggs' dire predictions, Piers had risen to the task of navigating, and it had been fairly trouble-free journey from Nanohana to the river port closest to Rainbase. Smoker's hunch had been that Straw Hat Luffy would be gunning for Sir Crocodile. Since Crocodile was known to have made his casino in Rainbase his headquarters, it seemed likely that if they waited there long enough, the pirates would show up. With regards to their navigator's absence, Smoker had explained that he had sent Briggs on a mission, but the rest of the crew held a private conviction that he'd annoyed the captain again, and the truth was that he had really been sent on an errand to get him out of the way. As Briggs was not particularly popular on board the ship, no one really complained. The warrant officer never mingled with the crew anyway, so social life on the ship went on as normal, and by all accounts the clandestine party had really been something. We're going to wait here. Piers, in Briggs' absence you are in charge of the ship. I want you and your squad to be on the lookout in case the pirates show up on their ship. Yes sir. There's also the possibility that they abandoned their ship and decided to cross the desert on foot. So we're going to position our soldiers around the town. Tashigi and I will be in charge of the ground forces. Keep your eyes open. And Thoth, if you didn't count the incident where Tashigi and Smoker had been so deep in conversation they hadn't noticed the loud entrance of a certain pair of thirsty pirates who had just crossed the desert. Fortunately, that was rectified 1 minute later. And this was how Kuina came to be facing off Sanji, cook of the Straw Hat Pirates. While there had been talk of her staying in Piers' squad, and being stuck on the ship, Piers had insisted that she be assigned to Smoker's group. He knew her well enough by then that she'd prefer to be one of the ones pursuing the Straw Hats and would have chafed at the inaction. Which was good foresight. Apparently, Straw Hat himself had brazenly come through the door with one of his flunkies, run into Smoker and Tashigi, and in the ensuing chaos of pursuit, his entire gang of pirates had been flushed out and were now running in all directions across town. When the fugitives had split up, she had attempted to use her senses to track Straw Hat down, but then it had been so chaotic in that somehow they'd raised the ire of the townspeople, some of whom were giving chase too. In any case, the extra people had been her downfall in this instance, as too much interference meant that she wasn't going to be able to hear the sounds well enough. On losing the sounds of Straw Hat or Zoro's Haramaki, she'd settled for the next most familiar sound, the flirtatious pirate who had been in Nanohana. She wasn't sure what she was going to do with him when she defeated him though. He didn't seem to be keen on fighting her offensively. In fact, it soon turned out that the reason he didn't want to was because of her gender. Some sort of gentlemanly honor kind of thing. Long ago this would have resulted in her being royally insulted, but now that she was a marine and he was nothing but a pirate, She understood it wasn't personal, so she only fought hard enough to get him to surrender. From her point of view, he was probably another poor schmuck who had been blackmailed into serving Straw Hat anyway, so there was no need to go all out. "Please, Miss Marine." He dodged her strike again. He was rather good at this. Violence is totally unnecessary for one as lovely as yourself. She really wasn't used to this kind of treatment. People always admired her skills, but no one had even complimented her on her looks since her scarring, well, unless you counted Piers, who thought it cool, which was not the same thing as lovely. Despite herself, she blushed. "Surely you must understand how I could never hurt a lady of grace and elegance such as yourself." With some effort, she shook herself and told her vanity that this was all flattery and no, she wasn't going to let it get to her. "Where is Straw Hat going?" she demanded. "Tell me." "I hate to deny a beautiful lady's request," the other man said, "but I'm afraid I can't tell you. Way too well-bred and noble to be a pirate. Yet he had such loyalty to that fiendish captain. He had to be protecting someone. Was Straw Hat such a genius at taking perfectly respectable people and ruining their lives by forcing them to become pirates under him?" The ball was in full swing, as the ladies took turns dancing with the elegant Prince Charming. The subjects all loved their prince, for he was as handsome outside as his heart was pure. After all, on the day he was born, the angels themselves had gotten together and decided to make a dream come true, sprinkling gold dust in his hair and starlight in his eyes so blue. All was beauty and contentment, but upon this happy scene, bad news broke like a dark storm before an unprotected shore. "Fair prince, pirates are attacking our kingdom. Quickly, we must protect our people, to the stables." But alas, for all the valor of their men, they were no match for the evil pirate Straw Hat Luffy. "Impossible. The royal cavalry has been defeated." Panic reigned as the remnants of the army retreated. "Yes, the diabolical Straw Hat Luffy shall now raise your pathetic little kingdom to the ground, and kill this random woman here." "No, I'll do anything to protect my people." The noble prince came forward. "Release her, take my life instead." "Ahoo ha ha ha. Just taking your life isn't enough. You really want me to spare your people, princeling? Then serve me for life, pledge your service to me, and I promise I won't lay a hand on your people." "Noble prince, don't do it," the woman pleaded. "But I must," said the prince. "For our people's sake." And then he turned to the pirate. "If you will spare my people and leave this place and never come back, then I swear my utmost loyalty to your cause, Straw Hat Luffy." Straw Hat Luffy laughed evilly, and motioned for his men to bring the prince on board. "It is done." Such heinousness, not for the first time, Kuina vowed to put an end to that. The Baroque works agent was staring up and into the pretty blue, cloudless sky. After all, it was what you would see if you were floating on your back in the water because you'd just fallen off a ship after being punched in the face by a marine. "Mr. 11 is there," the message from Nanohana had said. "The marines have him prisoner. The order from the boss is to silence him." Stupid message should have mentioned that the ship was guarded by an overzealously watchful officer and a squad of marines. Another Baroque works agent went flying off the ship and into the water. "Whoops. Sorry about that, didn't mean to break your nose," said the marine officer. "But stay out, okay?" "Officer Piers, you don't have to apologize to them," another marine called out. "Right, sorry, you don't have to apologize to us either," came the exasperated reply. "I think it's his way of trash-talking," a third marine whispered conspiratorially to his squad mate as their pugilist officer sent another agent tumbling off the ship. The agent scowled. They'd come unprepared, but that sure as hell wasn't going to happen again. Things were not going well for Sanji. While he had plenty of practice fighting with swordsmen, the lady swordsman's particular style of fighting was so different from Marimo's technique that it was distracting. It was fluid and graceful, and while she had not the buxom beauty of his beloved Nami Swan, she had a certain elegance about her that was mesmerizing. She was obviously a well-bred lady, and the way she moved gave her away despite that unflattering marine uniform. Overlock onslaught. The woman was executing some crazy stabbing combination attack that made Sanji realize how unsuitable his particular thoughts at the moment were. She was very graceful and all that, but she was also not the type of opponent you could afford to lose your concentration on while in a fight. This setback was so going to keep him from being able to join up with the others at the casino. The Moku Moku Marine had gone after Luffy, but it was just Zoro's luck that while taking on both Baroque Works agents and those pesky Marines, so Vivi could get away, he found himself still stuck with that annoying Marine swordswoman on his tail. Not Kuina. The other one. I told you. Our duel was settled in Logatown, he said as faced down the woman. Her men were lying in various states of injury on the ground, as they hadn't stood much of a chance against the famed pirate hunter of the East Blue. No, it is not, Tashigi scowled, drawing her blade. I will never rest until I take Wado Ichimonji and those other swords from your hands. I told you before, the only person who will take. The reminder of his previous words seemed to enrage the Marine. I told you I will be the one to take them. Zoro raised an eyebrow. That had been said with some rather unnecessary vehemence. But he had enough of the irritating woman. Fine, come and try. The fight was short and indecisive. She had never been in the same league with him, and that hadn't changed. In 5 strokes he had her disarmed, on her knees and clutching her arm in pain from where it had been slashed. It was not a serious wound. You were more of a challenge, warned her, as he sheathed his swords. Aren't you going to kill me this time? She seemed to be on the verge of crying. Don't flatter yourself, he told her, perhaps a little cruelly. I don't stain my swords pointlessly. He had to catch up with Vivi, so he turned to make his way. In that case you should kill me now. The woman had risen to her feet. Because I swear, Roronoa, I am not going to lose to that woman. Zoro stopped short. There could only be one person she could be referring to. You wanted to talk to me, Tashigi-san? The Marines of Smoker's ship were still en route to Rainbase when the seaman had received a summons from her commanding officer. Yes, Tashigi said stiffly to Kuina, I want to fight you. The girl had been pointedly avoiding her since the incident at Nanohana. Tashigi-san, I'm not sure if this is proper. Do I have to threaten you with a keel hauling to get you to comply? Tashigi snapped. Or do you consider yourself too special to duel with me? I never claimed that I was special, Tashigi-san, Kuina said slowly. I don't know what is it that you have against me, but if I have inadvertently offended you. That annoying girl was being patronizing now. Tashigi coolly drew her sword, Cashew. Let's make it interesting by upping the ante. Fight me, the winner gets to keep the sword of their opponent. Tashigi-san, I don't think this is a good idea, you are very fond of that sword. So you have already presumed you will win. Tashigi-san, with due respect, Are you too scared to wager your sword? Do you not have confidence in your sword skills? Tashigi knew she had struck a nerve. Off came the girl's ladylike demeanor, and underneath, where she knew it had been all along, was a competitive, arrogant girl who hated to lose. Fine then. If you won't regret it, let's begin. The portion of the deck that they used for training was cleared as both opponents faced each other. Tashigi wielded Cashew, her stance ready for anything and everything. And Kuina just stood there, the Shikomizu clasped to her chest. And she wasn't even drawing her sword. Why aren't you fighting? Despite herself she could hear her voice rising in anger. Are you not even going to give me the satisfaction of a matsi? Even before she knew it was coming, something hit her in the stomach, it hurt. She fell to her knees, gripping her midsection. From the corner of her eye she could just see the concealed blade flash back into its sheath. When had Kuina drawn it? Tashigi winced. A cracked rib. At the very least. And she wasn't bleeding, which meant that girl had just smacked her with the flat of the blade of her sword. And ended the match in the most humiliating manner possible. You left yourself open in at least 3 places. How can you be a warrant officer and yet be this sloppy? The thin veneer of humility from the blind girl's ladylike mannerisms had slipped again. Tashigi could feel her blood beginning to boil. Something furious welled up in the warrant officer in her moment of humiliation. Before she knew it, she was running her mouth off. I never liked you since the moment we met. Something about her words were hauntingly familiar. What? The girl sounded confused. All my life I've trained my heart out to be a great swordsman. But suddenly you show up and now all I get is you're being so much better rubbed into my face. It's just so easy for you, isn't it? You're so freaking gifted, being blind isn't even a problem. The tone of her opponent instantly became defensive. You don't even know anything about me. I can't stand you. Tashigi continued her tirade, overriding the other girl's protests. I can't stand that the very fact that you exist makes me. Here she paused, trying to find the words to express her frustration, redundant. There was a ringing silence, broken only by her angry breathing as all her repressed fears came rushing out to the surface. It was an odd scene, two women, strangely alike. One breaking down in a storm of emotion and the other watching on, her face an emotionless mask. Zoro said that. Now she remembered. Logatown. Those were Roronoa's words, and she was parroting them without realizing it. Is that why you wanted to pick a fight with me? To prove him wrong in what he said? There was a barely disguised fury in the other girl's voice. Or would have beating me been some sort of consolation prize? Tashigi stayed silent, not wanting to betray herself further. Nevertheless, Kuina understood. I am not some substitute for Zoro, warrant officer. And whatever he says does not represent what I think. I am myself. And that's who I've been since the day I was born. She turned her back to Tashigi. Thank you for the offer of your sword, but I don't want it. The only sword I intend to claim is my Wado Ichimonji. And Tashigi was left behind, an ironic echo of her own words haunting her. I am going to take Wado Ichimonji from you before she does, Tashigi vowed. I will not lose to her. So if you don't kill me now, Roronoa, know that one day I will be the one to defeat you. Oh, Roronoa seemed to be amused at her. Or perhaps he was just amused at how his childhood rival had managed to rub her the wrong way. Strong words, but you don't really have the skills to back it up. She had lost, and was currently at a disadvantage, but still she bristled at the insult. You're the same, the both of you. Just because you're so good you think you can be as arrogant as you like. This did not seem to impress the pirate hunter. There is something an infuriating girl once told me. Roronoa's tone was mocking. Now how did it go again? Oh yeah. A dog that loses should stay quiet, barking about it only makes it look more pitiful. This was too much. Before she knew what she was doing, she had snatched up her dropped sword with her good hand, and was furiously engaging Roronoa in battle with it. Rage didn't seem to help her however, because Roronoa simply dropped her with a smack to the ribs with his sheathed sword, without even a glance in her direction. Just like that woman had done. You want to defeat me, but you and I are not even on the same level, Roronoa said as he walked away. If you really want to beat her by beating me, you'd better aim to be the greatest swordsman in the world. He paused and grinned insolently back at her, because Kuina and I, neither of us are settling for anything less. And then he was gone. Kuina ran furiously after the pirate she had been fighting. It was beginning to get really frustrating. The fight had degenerated into a pursuit once more as that man had chosen to flee instead of engaging her in battle. She doubted that her shouts of, "Get back here," were having any effect. Damn it, he might have been a lousy opponent, but that man had disproportionate leg strength and could really run. She was having trouble just keeping up with him, much less close the gap between them. How long this ridiculous chase might have gone on if something else hadn't happened was hard to say. But as it turned out, something did happen. Suddenly, the world became silent. No. Kuina was sure she hadn't lost her sense of hearing. She could still hear the sounds of the streets around her, the sounds of the iron-capped shoes her mark wore, even the shouts of the Marines in the distance. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something important, something pivotal, had just happened. Her strides slowed as she struggled to identify what it was that was missing. Of course, the silence, she had never been consciously aware of it, but there had always been this reassuring sound at the back of her mind. It had always existed. But now, nothing. Whatever it was, it had gone dead silent. Something is wrong. Her steps slowed to a stop as she shook her head, trying to figure out what was causing this sick feeling in the pit of her stomach. Their voices are gone, and then suddenly, she understood. Without hesitation, she turned and ran, away from the direction of the fleeing pirate who was no Lohiji made her way through the chaotic streets, mustering the men who were recovering from the Straw Hats' onslaught. There had been quite a few wounded, but none seriously, thankfully. She wondered if Captain Smoker was having better luck than she was. "Have you seen Captain Smoker?" she asked one of the uninjured Marines who was helping his friend to his feet. The Marine shook his head. "No idea, ma'am. That cut looks nasty, you should get that looked at. We can worry about minor injuries later." Tashigi did not want to think about her defeat at the moment. "We need to find Captain Smoker and bring down those pirates. We had one of them cornered, but he turned out to be dangerous. We were having a hard time until Seaman Kuina stepped in." "Wonderful. as if she needed another reminder of Miss Perfect's skill. I'm pretty sure she went after him, but, oh, there she is. True to his statement, Kuina was hurrying down the street towards them. Kuina. Wait. Have you seen Captain SMO? The girl simply ran past her without answering. At first Toshigi had almost been affronted by her rudeness, until she caught a glimpse of the girl's face. Toshigi admitted that disliked Kuina. She disliked her false facade of being a lady, the undue attention she got for being a skilled swordsman despite her disability, her underlying prideful arrogance that made the warrant officer feel that the seaman secretly held her in contempt. But one thing that she knew about Kuina, that while she might fear some things, it was rare that she ever openly showed that she was terrified of anything. Yet in that split second the girl had run by, and Toshigi had had no doubt that what she had seen was a Kuina that had been terrified to the core of her being. Kuina was running as fast as she could, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The silenced voices were driving her mad. Kuina. Behind her she could hear Toshigi coming after her. Her one-sided fight with that pirate and the ensuing pursuit had winded her somewhat, and the warrant officer was able to catch up. What's going on? Why are you so scared? What happened? Something's wrong. They're gone. Kuina managed to gasp as they ran. How could this disaster have happened? Why hadn't she noticed they had gone missing earlier? Why hadn't she? What do you mean? Toshigi sounded puzzled. Damn woman, wasn't it clear enough? Didn't she realize the mistake they had made? We need to get back to the ship. Now it was too late. A proud little girl was running into the house to report her unprecedented win in the dojo. For the first time ever, she had beaten someone 3 years older and 2 levels above her. Okawa-san. Mother had gone to visit some relatives. In fact, she had promised to be back in time for the match, but it was normal to have delays when her journeys involved sailing to the other islands, so they hadn't really worried when she had been late home. Okawa-san, are you home yet? I have great news. I did it, I won. The house was unnaturally quiet, and still, it was odd. Her mother should have been home by now, waiting outside for her, Kuina, to come home. Okawa-san had been due in the morning and it was well past noon. There should have been sailors waiting to greet them on their return. The lookout should have spotted their approach long before. But even from this distance, even as Toshigi saw Kuina dart across the gangplank ahead of her, she could see it was unmanned. Kuina had been right. Something was very, very wrong. As she got closer she saw through her sweat and dust-streaked glasses the still bodies of the white-clad Marines they had left to guard the ship. 1, 2, 3. All of them sprawled on deck, motionless. Whether they were dead or alive she wasn't sure. This was bad enough, and then there were still members of the crew that were still unaccounted for. A heart-wrenching cry cut through the air. Toshigi had never heard it before, but she knew it could only be Kuina's. On gaining the top of the gangplank, her heart dropped at the sight that greeted her eyes. Kuina was kneeling by a bloodied figure that lay prone on the starboard side of the boat, near the mast where they had left Mr. 11 prisoner. Mr. 11 was undoubtedly dead. She judged that he had been shot in the head at point-blank range. And worst of all, Petty Officer Pierce, or what was left of him, lying crumpled on the deck. His vest was stained black with what could have only been blood. One arm was bent oddly, suggesting that it had been broken. His bare, clenched fists were now a mockery of the missing iron-knuckle gloves Smoker had given him. And Kuina was frozen to the spot like a statue. The voices were hushed, and spoke in tones that were unlike anything Kuina had ever heard before. Despite the attempts to speak softly, they carried through the screen doors all too clearly. It happened so quickly, Koshiro. There wasn't even a chance to. Up to the end, Kuyaki was trying to say something, but we couldn't. Kuina flung the screen open, ignoring their cries of alarm, and came face to face with the white horror of the truth. Did you find the doctor anywhere? Toshigi asked Kuina, who was still frozen in some sort of shock. The girl could barely shake her head. Down, below, told him. Barricade self in. Both women jumped. Piers, you're alive? Breathed Toshigi in astonishment. The man had taken an insane amount of punishment. There should have been no way he could still be breathing, much less be in a state to talk. Baroque works. Billions, gasped the Marine. Took out. First group. But second group, came back from behind. Gunned us down. He struggled for breath, coughing up blood as he did so. "Sorry, warrant officer," he killed. "Prisoner." At this point, Kuina got up and wordlessly headed below decks. Toshigi didn't need to ask to know where she was going. "Don't worry about such stupid things at a time like this." Concern made Toshigi raise her voice at her subordinate. "And don't try to talk." Piers shook his head and smiled weakly. "Doctor'll fix me. Tell Miss Kuina. Not to W." But the effort of speaking finally seemed to have taken it out of him. He closed his eyes and lay still, the remainder of his sentence left unfinished. "Piers." Toshigi tried to remember her first aid training from the academy. "Damn it, Piers. Why the hell was Kuina taking so long? Where was the doctor?" "Those intruder bastards," swore the doctor when he came up deck with Kuina in tow, carrying medical supplies. "They tried to shoot the door lock to get to me. Didn't work, but it did ruin the lock and jam it shut, so I was trapped down there until Kuina girl came and reduced the door into splinters. Oh laws. Piers, you damned fool. I said don't come back crying to me when you get sick. Not when you get killed." The doctor fooled no one, and everyone could tell that he was scared for his patient. The other Marines with her had finally caught up, and some were checking on the condition of the other Marines, while others watched in dismay. Kuina was calmly helping to tend to the wounded. After the first few moments of betrayal, the swordswoman's face had assumed a frozen mask with an expression that straddled the line between tranquil and grim. The woman's closest friend had just been riddled with bullet holes and then left to die by his assailants, and there she was keeping her head in an exemplary manner. Doing what she could do to help, no hysterics or anything. Toshigi wasn't sure what to think of it, but she did wish rather enviously that she had had the other's self-control. "They are all hurt, but he's in the worst state. We're going to have to get him down to sick bay and operate. Help me get them below, quickly," the doctor barked. Toshigi relayed the orders to the others, and they moved the wounded below deck, leaving behind the dregs of a spent battle. They were all gathered in her room, the ones who had traveled with her, the other adults from the dojo, her father. Kuina. Her his feet and was looking at her, an expression on his face that she had never seen, yet she instinctively knew what it meant. Without saying a word, she turned around and ran. He called after her, but she clapped her hands over her ears and just kept running and running. As far as her feet could carry her. As far away as she could from that house over which death now hung. She did not want to, no, she could not, just stand there and listen to her father telling her that thing lying there covered in the white sheet was her Oka-san. Those of the living will recognize the touch of death gods, even if they have never felt it affect in their lives before, and instinctively, they flee from it. Kuina stormed out of the sick bay, splattered with blood. The first thing she did after taking several deep, calming breaths, was to lean over the side of the ship, and be violently sick. Toshigi followed suit. They hadn't dared to ask about the details, but the doctor hadn't been willing to commit to any information about chances of the casualties pulling through. Well, other than snapping about not bothering him with chances of survival, or they guarantee it'd be zero. It was a none too subtle instruction to leave and let him get on with his work. Given the doctor was usually unfailingly polite to anyone of the fairer sex, he must have truly been under a lot of stress. Toshigi felt drained. Their trip to the City of Dreams had turned into a nightmare. Captain Smoker still hadn't returned and was now missing. Their ship had been raided, their prisoner killed, and the only other officer on board was not in a condition to do anything. And so Toshigi alone was left in command of the ship, and the weight of the responsibility was crushing her. She would have been happy to have even Briggs around now, but he was still off on that mission for Captain Smoker. Nevertheless, she had to make arrangements for search parties for Captain Smoker and the Straw Hats, oversee the restoration of the upper deck and direct the containment of Mr. Eleven's corpse until they decided what to do with it. She couldn't fall apart now. With a start, Toshigi realized that sometime during her planning Kuina had disappeared below deck. Probably to change out of the bloodied clothes. Good idea, she should probably do the same. The first thing she saw when she entered her room was the pile of marine uniforms that had been flung onto Kuina's bed. The second thing was Kuina herself, and this was what made Toshigi do a double take. The swordswoman had discarded her soiled marine attire and was once again resplendent in the magnificent gray silk kimono Toshigi had first seen her in. She had also extracted her parasol sword from where it had been stored, and was checking it as if in preparation for battle. In fact, her face was heavily painted, and while not exactly garish, the way it was applied made one think of war paint. "Kuina?" she said curiously, "where are you going?" There was no answer, Toshigi noted with some alarm. Kuina's face was still frozen in the same mask of tranquil grimness. It was then when Toshigi realized that Kuina hadn't been taking what had happened so well after all. She'd simply delayed her reaction to it until it was prudent to do so. A look at her face convinced Toshigi of the futility of trying to stop her. The glimpse of fury she had seen was enough to tell her if she attempted to get in her way, Toshigi probably wouldn't last very long. The girl was baying for blood. "Kuina, wait!" The other woman paused on her way out, but remained silent. It struck Toshigi that Kuina had not uttered a single sound since the moment they'd rushed back to ship and discovered their people utterly massacred. "I know what you're planning to do. I'm not going to stop you, but..." She rummaged in her pocket and pulled out a baby den mushi. "Take this with you. Report in if you find Captain Smoker or see anything." Kuina paused, her face still a stony mask. "He's missing, please." There was no love lost between them, but she nodded and accepted the little snail. They both regarded each other for a moment, then the swordswoman turned and headed for the door. "Toshigi," the word was so softly spoken that Toshigi could barely hear them. "Thank you." There was a long pause before Kuina finally spoke again, and what she said next was so unlike what Toshigi's image of other swordswomen would say that it stunned the warrant officer. Toshigi was still staring in surprise when the Avenger disappeared with an ominous rustle of watered silk. Kuina. His daughter was still kneeling before the grave. The incense burned, sending wisps of scented smoke into the air. They had whispered it was strange that she hadn't even cried during the funeral. So unemotional, that child. After the funeral, she'd gone straight to the dojo, and broken several shinai and a practice dummy within the ensuing hour. Koshiro had thought it best to let her get it out of her system, but now it was going too far. She had not spoken for a week. Not since Kuyaki's death. "Kuina. Please say something." He placed a hand upon his daughter's shoulder. "Your mother wouldn't have wanted you to grieve like this, Kuina." Still, only the slow crumbling of the incense stick burning broke the silence. He understood and sat down next to her, noting that it apparently needed more time. It was hours later when he finally heard her voice. The words were so softly spoken he could barely hear them. "I can't even cry for Okawa-san." Her shoulders were shaking. "It's all right to cry," he told her. "Life is a fragile thing." She said, "I had to be strong, so I won't cry. I'm going to become a great swordswoman and win every match I fight. And I'll be good enough to become the head of the dojo. Just like she said I could be. I am never losing again. I don't want to lose anyone anymore." Koshiro nodded to himself, and did not tell her that she had left out the word to between lose and anyone. She knew what she was doing was foolish and reckless. Ichi-san would not have approved. Captain Smoker would not have approved. But right now Kuina was so upset and angry she didn't care. This took precedence over everything, over finding Captain Smoker, over finding Straw Hat, even over reclaiming her sword from Zoro. Gunned down from the behind. Her face darkened at the memory of what could very well have been his last words. They'd taken his gloves as a trophy. The thought of it made her sick, but it was their mistake. She had them now. With some effort she forced herself into comparative calm as she strained to listen for the sound of black leather with iron knuckles. It couldn't be that common. It took a while, but there, in the distance, it called. She moved towards it. The people of Rainbase were accustomed to seeing finely dressed individuals on the way to gamble at the casino. No one paid her any undue attention. The fact that she wasn't even going towards the direction of the Rain Dinners casino did not seem to register with them. He was never going to be able to live this down. That was, of course, presuming that he was actually going to live. Captain Smoker sat cross-legged in the sea stone cage, acutely aware that it had been a moment of rank stupidity that had resulted in the sad situation he had found himself in. Trapped in the clutches of a pirate, together with another group of pirates. The same group of pirates he had been chasing, actually, to add insult to injury. On one hand, revelations were coming in thick and fast. Straw Hat was not allied to Sir Crocodile. In fact, the mastermind behind all this had been none other than the Shichibukai himself. Princess Vivi had hired the Straw Hat Pirates to keep Crocodile from overthrowing the Alabastan monarchy. Well, pitting pirate against pirate was like fighting fire with fire, he supposed. On the other hand, none of this was going to make any difference, because he wasn't going to be able to get any of this information out. And the blasted turncoat pirate Tur was gloating about it. Smoker had enough experience to know that the man was as cunning as they came. He had to have been supremely confident in his own abilities, for he was openly outlining to his victim how he was going to cover up the entire incident and arrange for the Marine's death. Smoker bristled. In any other situation, it would have been an evenly matched level between the two logia users. If it weren't for the damned fact that he was in a damned kairoseki cage, which damned well meant that all Crocodile had to do was flood the room and he'd be damned helpless and dead. Drowned in the middle of a lake on a desert island suffering from 4 years drought, there was a certain irony there. The worst part was the realization no one in his crew knew where he was. The men and Tashigi would have lost sight of him in the headlong rush into the casino. The chances of them finding him down here were slim to non-existent. Suddenly all those complaints of Tashigi about his recklessness really made sense. And goddammit, he'd gone and left Briggs back in Nanohana doing reconnaissance, so no chance of help from that quarter either. Not that it would have done any good. Smoker was sure no one else under his command would be able to match the level of a warlord like Crocodile. At least not yet. Tashigi, Piers and that girl Kuina. A whole generation of young hopefuls. All brimming with potential, but still way too underdeveloped. He had truly meant to whip them into shape to become great Marines. Not just powerful, but with thinking heads on their shoulders. Marines who didn't just follow orders blindly but actually understood the justice they stood for. Marines who would stand fast against the corruption of power and prestige. Marines who wouldn't sideline their justice and kowtow to the world nobles just because that was the way it had always been. Smoker hated the hypocrisy that plagued the upper ranks of the Marines right now. He despised the higher-ups woe stooped to making deals with criminals like Crocodile. Look where that had gotten them. The pirate was planning to betray the world government, and he wasn't even surprised at this, and openly laughing about it, and all he, Smoker, was going to be was a footnote casualty in said warlord's report. But he was not called the White Hunter for nothing. A hunter knows to be patient, and a good hunter does not give up so easily. And so Smoker sat, watched, and waited for an opportunity to turn the tables. Things were going pretty well, reflected the Baroque Works agent. They had managed to off that useless Mr. 11, and other than the initial trouble, their superior numbers had ensured that the Marines wouldn't be a problem any longer. And now, in the coup to end all coups, they'd managed to get their hands on the traitor officer agent who had turned out to be the Princess of Alabasta. Best of all, she was without her bodyguard flunkies. Of course, being an officer agent meant that she wasn't a pushover either, but as they had demonstrated in the case of storming the Marine ship, superior numbers meant zerging asterisk was a perfectly viable strategy. So while she put up a pretty mean fight with her little jeweled slashers, a rear attack while her attention was occupied fighting off attackers, and an introduction to the butt end of a rifle was quite enough to subdue her. What he hadn't been expecting was the appearance of an exotically dressed woman with a parasol in the midst of the action. She was an unwanted addition, an unnecessary complication to the plan. But before he'd even managed to advise her that she should turn around and leave and pretend that she saw nothing, she spoke first. "Where did you get those gloves?" "These gloves," said the agent in confusion. "The knuckle dusters, dumbass," his partner pointed out. "The ones you took from the guy who broke Melly's nose." Then it clicked. "Oh, you mean these gloves?" The Baroque Works agent smiled, crackling his knuckles. "So you're connected to that troublesome Marine officer we took care of?" "Oh, that chicken-hearted blue vest guy? He wasn't so tough," said the second agent mockingly. "Squealed pretty loud while we were breaking his arm, didn't he? That boxing ball." He never finished the sentence. "The Sky Islanders call it mantra," Ichi-san explained. "An old Shandorian word, I believe. It is the ability to tell by the sounds a person's body makes. No, by their presence alone, where they are, and though you cannot see them, what they are thinking and even planning to do." "Forgive me, Ichi-san," Kuina said uncertainly, "but this sounds a little far-fetched. I can see how the movement of the body makes sounds and how we could possibly predict what comes next with practice, but thoughts. This ability is not considered common." Ichi-san continued, ignoring her question. In fact, they believe that it is a talent confined to a gifted few. But I believed otherwise and proved them to be mistaken. It has naught to do with talent. It is about ambition and how you listen. But, see, you are not listening. You are only listening to what you want to hear, and then ignore the rest. There was a pause. I apologize, Ichi-san. Good. You need to learn to listen, Kuina. Because we, who have been bereft of our sight, have a vast advantage over all those who might seek to learn mantra. Normal people are too focused on what they see. Being unable to see, we focus on our other senses, especially sound. As such, our ears are more attuned to hearing what would pass for silence for other people. And that is the very essence of mantra. Unless they block their sight, even those people who have an inborn talent for mantra will not have as much ease of mastering it as a little blind girl from a quiet village. Ichi-san paused, as if lost in thought, then she spoke again. I will be honest with you, Kuina. Even with our advantage, there is no easy way to learn to tap into mantra. I have heard rumors that it sometimes can be triggered much more quickly by mental shock or trauma, but the only reliable way that I know of is simply what I have been teaching you. You had me listening to the cloth because, if you can tell what cloth it is by just its sound, do you not think you could learn to predict what your opponent is going to do by the sound of their movement, even movements of the spirit? The idea was stunning, a little fantastical, even. But if Ichi-san believed it, Kuina let her mind go blank and listened to the sounds of the quiet village. Then she realized that there was never quite silence after all. In the distance someone was whetting a scythe to harvest the rice, and she could hear it even though the barn was some distance away. If she tried really hard, she could almost hear the sound of boys training in the dojo of her father. She opened her eyes. I understand, Ichi-san, but I have barely begun to be able to use this sense. What I have taught you is not mantra, Kuina, Ichi-san said decisively. I have merely shown you where the door exists. For the rest of it and beyond, you can only learn on your own. With the Baroque works agent's last taunt, something had snapped within her, and the seething, blinding rage burst into a roaring flame. A sudden mental shock or trauma, Ichi-san had said. It was true. That had been the final push that broke the last barrier that lay between her and access to the elusive realm of the unseen and unheard. Much like the suddenness of a dam giving way, the voices rushed into her awareness. All her life they had been nothing but faint echoes of echoes, with only brief moments where she could decipher a whispered word or two. Now, they were as clear as bells ringing in her head. The thoughts of everyone around her, their intentions, their presence, even their near futures. She was in a state of perfect harmony with her surroundings. Time slowed to a crawl. Never had she felt so separated from the present, yet so alive. The thoughts streamed from her enemies, and she could hear them all in concert with each other. Try and rush her from the side. The other was loading a rifle and going to aim for her head, except that he would never pull the trigger, because Koyajaku would have claimed his life by then. It was almost like a kind of omniscience. She knew everything that was about to happen. It was laughably easy to avoid the attacks of the Baroque works agents. Even easier to cut them down and take their worthless lives. She was dancing, happily dancing, a grotesque dance of death dealing and blood splattering amidst a hailstorm of Gatling bullets that came from above. Instinctively she knew that she had nothing to fear from the new arrival, and in the space of seconds, she had wiped out almost all the remaining contingent of mercenaries. She was perfectly aware that overhead, something massive swooped, and carried off with it the girl they had surrounded earlier. But her attention was not focused on the girl, but for the last man standing. He was shaking in fear, and she knew by the sound, that on his hands he wore a pair of black gloves, black, with bloodied iron knuckles. She smiled demurely, and approached him, Koyajaku deadly in her hand. You want the gloves? Here, take them, desperately. He tugged them off and threw them towards her. Too little, too late. Here he was assuming that she was after just the gloves. Not even close. In a single movement she had his gun reduced to scrap metal and his blood staining the gloves even further. She raised her blade. The end would be swift. Stop, please, stop, it's about what I said about your friend, right? I'll admit it. I lied. She paused, more out of disgust at his groveling than any desire to be merciful. Mercy, begged the miserable man. Have mercy. I'll tell you the truth. your marine friend, he wasn't a coward, all right? He single-handedly punched out a whole bunch of our men, until we managed to get another group to sneak up from behind. She could hear every thought, but as the terrified scoundrel scrambled for a way to pacify her, something unexpected happened. As she read his thoughts, she realized that with her newfound ability she could also glimpse what he was thinking, and it was a memory. Sheesh, you people don't give up easily, do you? The Marine officer was running towards the agent, and floored him with a single punch. Despite his unthreatening appearance, that Marine was ripping through the Baroque works ranks, knocking out agent left and right. It seemed as though he was going to be victorious when suddenly, he staggered forward as new shots rang through the air. The Marines with him were falling right and left in the hailstorm of bullets. The agent smiled. The second wave had arrived. Even after we plugged him, he got up twice after being shot and kept on fighting. She could hear everything. Why won't you die? The agent was screaming. That man was insane. He was on his knees now, but without warning, he got up again, and desperately charged the nearest agent, managing to hit him in the solar plexus before collapsing. She could hear everything that had happened from his memory. The criminal's voice was raised in a panic, several octaves higher than normal. Fear had driven all reason out of his head and he was simply yammering whatever came to mind in hopes that they would be the magic words. We had to pump in a few more rounds before he finally went down for good. And stay down. The sound of a gun being reloaded, and fired again for good measure. She did not want to hear this. She did not want to know, but she couldn't block it out while that groveling worm was reliving his memory. And she was forced to hear every bit of it. Having executed Mr. 11, Agent paused, and smiled down at the defeated Marine. Not so tough are you now, boxing bastard? I only did it because we wanted to make sure he stayed down. Was there no way to make this stop? Stop. She knew from the aftermath what was coming next and did not want to witness it firsthand. Nice gloves. I'll take them if you don't mind. There was a sickening crunch. After all, you won't be needing them anymore. I didn't break his arm to gloat. I swear, tears streaked down her cheeks, making ghastly inroads into her makeup. Why hadn't Ichi-san warned her that mantra could be such a terrible thing? I will never forgive you. The color of rage filled the darkness that was her vision, just as the screaming voices rose to a crescendo in her head and all rational thought left her mind. Hands trembling with fury, she raised Koyajaku. In her mind she could picture every vital point in his body. And at every point where she knew it would hurt but not kill, she thrust Koyajaku into it, eliciting cries of pain from the object of her vengeance. Who was it who was mocking about squealing in pain now? But it wasn't enough. He was going to have to suffer much more before the screaming voices in her head would be satisfied. The voices were screaming for blood. They were screaming for vengeance. And she was implacable. His voice rose into a horrified wail at each bite of the blade. A death of 1,000 cuts. Make him beg for death. The voices were urging. Make him regret that he was ever born. The real world faded away in a fog of bloodlust. Nothing else existed for her now but the red rage, the black hate, and searing white justice that was hers to dispense. Again and again she raised her blade, and brought it down on the wretched excuse of a man. This might have gone on infinitely. But abruptly it stopped. Breaking through the mists of her self-shrouded awareness, was the realization that someone had caught her sword hand from behind. The voice was soft, but there was an underlying strength and authority in it. That is enough, said the new voice firmly. He has been beaten. There is no honor in continuing. Something about it evoked the quality of the desert and the skies, and a nobility greater than her own. For a moment she nearly struck out, resenting the newcomer's interference. But his words rang true, and the memory of her own words resonated in her mind. It is dishonorable for a swordsman to continue fighting against an opponent who has already been defeated. That was right. She'd said that long ago, back in Shelltown, on the first day she'd met Piers. Piers. With the name the voices began screaming again. Avenge him. Make them pay in blood. And then a quiet voice, which sounded partially like Zoro's, and partially like her father's, drowned them out of her mind. It is not what they would have wanted. Let it go. It was as if some kind of glass was cracking, and crashing down around her. As it did, she snapped back into reality, the color of rage ebbing away. Everything before her was splattered in red, and at her feet lay what remained of a man who had worked for Baroque works. A whimpering man who would have been better off dead than alive. What had she done? I couldn't stop it. She was aghast at herself. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. And with those words, the angry voices in her head finally stopped screaming, and fell dead silent. When she left the East Blue and crossed into the Grand Line, it had been in a single-minded pursuit of the two men she had hunted for so long. Zoro and the notorious pirate known as Straw Hat Luffy. Yet here she was, amidst the carnage of a battlefield, and no longer with any idea of what she was doing and why she was doing it. He had been given many honorifics and epithets, the most common being, the strongest warrior in Alabasta, and the guardian falcon of the royal family. Before the whole rebellion had started, the country had seen him as their indefatigable champion, a fearless warrior without peer. It might have amused the enemies of Pell the Falcon to know that this man, feared and respected for his nerves of steel and tranquil prowess in battle, did in fact have a weakness. That was, he was quite incapable of dealing with crying, sobbing girls. Vivi-sama had discovered this at an early age and used it to her full advantage. In fact, Chaka had oft commented that if the Princess of Alabasta had been anyone else but Vivi, this weakness of his might have been abused rather unbearably. Fortunately, the princess's sweet and noble nature ensured that the most it was ever exploited for was for obtaining forgiveness for her mischievous and headache-causing hijinks. Well, that in wheedling subsequent forbidden falcon-back rides across the desert, which Pell himself secretly enjoyed, although King Cobra would probably have his head on a pike for that if he ever found out. That was in Vivi's case. The strange girl with the sword, who was the object of his earlier intervention, was another story altogether. But as long as there was a possibility that this girl was an ally of Vivi-sama's, then it was his duty to extend his aid and protection to her. Despite his age, he was a veteran of many battles. He knew a tragedy occurring when he saw it. He shook his head. Such frenzied bloodlust, and from such an unlikely source. When the girl had finally calmed down, or at least, stopped the frenzied, repeated stabbing of that heinous piece of trash that had dared lay a finger on Vivi, he finally released his grip on her hand. As if she had been a marionette and he the only thing keeping it upright, she dropped the strange straight sword she had been holding and fell to her knees, trembling uncontrollably in a storm of sobbing. Not the weeping, trickling tears type of sobbing, but the tearless, raw and hurting type that only carries through an incoherent sound and unrestrained emotion. The last time he had seen someone cry that way, it had been at a town raided by desert bandits, and he had found a young girl sobbing over her mother's corpse. The memory of that horrific image had haunted him for years. This girl's reaction was uncannily similar, and other than preventing her from continuing her atrociously violent and self-destructive behavior, there wasn't really much else he could do to help her. "Pell, is she all right?" Vivi's voice floated from the building top where he had left her in safety. "She does not appear to have been injured. Physically," was all he could bring himself to say. "Vivi-sama, is this one of the allies you spoke of in your letter?" The princess shook her head. "No, I don't know who she is, but she helped me fight off those men. And strange as it sounds, I have a feeling I have seen her somewhere before." Pell's lip twitched upwards a little in wry amusement. 2 years, and the girl's habit of forgetting to divulge essential information still persisted. If there had been any suspicion that this may have not been Vivi but an impostor, it vanished then. "At the very least, she is the enemy of our enemy, and may be of assistance. We should return to Alubarna. I should be able to carry the both of you." "Wait, no. Pell, we need to find the others," and the princess appeared agitated now that the immediate danger was over and there was the pressing objective that had brought her to Rainbase. But his attention was no longer centered on his princess's words, because at that moment, behind Vivi loomed a sinister figure. My, how magnificent," drawled she, for it was indeed a woman clad in white leather and a matching hat. "I've never seen a human who could fly." Her voice was sultry and yet somehow mocking. He could feel the hackles of his neck rise. Moreover, the royal guard realized he had made a grave mistake in leaving Vivi behind on that rooftop. As fast as he was, the distance between the princess and her was far shorter than the distance between the princess and him. But he kept his cool, ignoring the traumatized sword-wielding girl, who appeared to be having some kind of mental breakdown, but there was not much he could do about that at the moment. and focusing his attention on the dangerous newcomer, for an opening, any opening to snatch Vivi away to safety again. That woman was speaking again, maddening words. It was a tactical game, of course. She knew he was a threat and was attempting to rile him up so that he would make a mistake. He suppressed his eagerness for her demise, even when she bragged of killing Igaram. Though for a moment, he had felt a cold, murderous rage well up that surprised even himself. But he had his limits. When she abruptly impaled his beloved princess through the chest, he lost it. And with it, he lost everything. Ichi-san, I have a question. Kuina stuck her needle into the pincushion as she finished the last seam on her latest kimono. It's about mantra. You wanted to ask me why I waited as long as I did before telling you about it. Yes. If I had known this was what you would be trying to teach me, I might have been less of a handful in the beginning. That was important. If you hadn't learned humility, patience and self-control, I would not have chosen to share knowledge pertaining to it with you. I do not understand. Let me tell you a story. There was once a child who was born with the gift of mantra. Such a special boy he was. Kuina could hear the sadness in Ichi-san's voice as she said this. Even by the standards of those gifted with mantra he was considered exceptional, but one day, through a series of unfortunate events he came to possess of one of those accursed devil fruits, and having the curiosity as was typical of a boy of his age, he consumed it and gained the powers the devil fruit offered him. That devil fruit changed him in many ways, but the most profound way it affected him was in his control of mantra. It enhanced his mantra capability, to the extent that he could hear the thoughts of everyone around him. Every single person in the land. All the time. And he couldn't stop. Not even if he wanted to. You mean? He couldn't stop. Ichi was in her monologue mode again, and ignored Kuina's interruption. And in the end, being forced to listen to all of it drove him mad. He lost himself and ran amok, destroying everything he once held dear. Kuina stayed tactfully silent. And he used to be such a sweet boy too. There was an unbearable sadness in Ichi-san's voice. Kuina couldn't bear to hear it anymore. She changed the subject. She hadn't understood why Ichi-san had wanted to tell her the story of the boy who went mad then, but now she did. Her mind was reeling from the earlier flood of awarenesses, from the unwanted glimpses into that agent's mind and her own grief and horror. She had been drowning in it, letting those voices take over. It had almost driven her to the edge of madness, and if it hadn't been for that one moment of sanity, that one human touch to pull her back into lucidity, it was hard to say how far into the darkness she would have fallen. That's out of the question. Why had she thought of mantra like it was some wonderful thing? It was absolutely horrible. All those voices in her head, and her no longer in control of herself. She never wanted anything to do with it again. She did something to Igaram, as she huddled in the middle of the square, surrounded by the bodies of the fallen. She struggled for control over herself. The silence was singing voices in her head, and she reveled in being to hear herself think again. How is that different to what you just did to my employees? What a joke. It didn't last long. She was snapped out of it by yet another screaming voice. Except this one was different. She recognized it, shrill and horrified as it was. It belonged to the one who had stopped her, the man with the soft steely voice who smelled of feathers. Vivi-sama. She felt the whoosh as something big and feathery flew past and above her. I'll turn you into Arabastan sand. The man's presence was gone from her side, and with that her shell-shocked mind made the association that the man and the flying feathery thing had been one and the same. Vice President. The voice came from one of the S sprawled out on the floor, whom she had previously cut down. Vice President. That smug voice from that woman on the rooftop belonged to one of the leaders of that accursed organization. Was she the one who had ordered the raid on the ship? Had she laughed the way she was doing now when she had received the confirmation that it had been done? Her hands clenched in anger, and she was surprised to find them clutching a pair of gloves. Pierre's gloves. When had she picked them up? She couldn't even remember. The gloves were sticky to the touch with half-dried blood. Did it belong to the agents, or Pierre's, or both? Her rage, previously spent, began flaring up again. And with it, the voices in her head. She forced them down. No, she would no longer use that accursed mantra ability. She was going to take out this vice president on her own hard-earned skill. The problem was that the woman was on the top of the building, and not being in possession of whatever ability that man had, she had to get up there the conventional way. The flight of stairs at the side of the structure. Not the most advantageous of attack positions, but what choice did she have? As silently as she could manage, she sprinted up the stone steps, as screams from the rooftop began anew. Pell was no stranger to pain, but right now, he knew he was fighting a losing battle against it. Forget the back-breaking pressure on his spine, forget the strangling hands that were constricting his windpipe, choking the breath out of him. No, the one thing that made all this feel as though he was being tied to a rack and having his heart cut out alive, was knowing that Vivi was having to witness all of this. The girl he had watched over as a little child was screaming, begging for Miss All Sunday to stop. He wanted to tell her to run, to save herself because he could not protect her this time, but his throat was slowly being crushed and any words that he attempted to utter only escaped as unintelligible gasps. Vivi didn't run. It was foolish of her, yet he knew her well enough that it did not surprise him at all when she chose to attack Miss All Sunday instead. Still, he could not repress his snarl of rage when the villain simply stopped her by sprouting arms which wrapped around her ankles, bringing her crashing to the ground. Amidst the excruciating agony of being bent almost double backwards, a flash of movement caught his eye. A gray streak of silk. The girl with the sword who had broken down earlier seemed to have regathered herself. She had reached the rooftop and was bearing down on Miss All Sunday with astonishingly swift movement. His tormentor did not seem aware of her approach, but he saw the flaw in the girl's attack even as she closed in. She was attacking Miss All Sunday with the afternoon sun to her back. The desert sun, already low in the sky, threw her long shadow across the floor of the roof. It did not go unnoticed by the multi-armed devil fruit user. Just as it seemed that she would be meeting the business end of the girl's sword, the devil fruit replicated arms sprouted out, wrenching the straight sword the girl carried out of her hands and then forcing them painfully backwards. "How rude," said Miss All Sunday in response to the girl's cries of pain as her arms were twisted behind her back. More arms were sprouting out of the floor, anchoring her to the spot. A hand clamped over the girl's mouth completed the effortless capture. "Don't interrupt. I'll tend to you in a moment." Only muffled cries from the raging swordswoman. "Let's see. Where were we, Miss Wednesday?" "Ah yes, your presence is required in our headquarters. Unfortunately, neither of your friends are invited." Vivi appeared to understand her intentions. Submission? No. He could feel the pressure as she brought the heel of her palm against his chin. Pell, clutch, then came the snap, then came the pain. And then came the darkness. Kuina could only cringe at the sound of cracking bone. There was a sharp cry from the man who smelled of feathers, and then the sound of a body meeting stone roof. That multi-armed monster had just killed that man in cold blood, just like that. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. The girl who could only be the Princess Vivi was no longer screaming, but whispering to herself in shock. "Come now, Miss Wednesday. Your friends are waiting for you," the woman said callously to the girl. "In a cage in rain dinners." A devil fruit user. Kuina hadn't anticipated that she would be fighting someone with such a freaky devil fruit ability. With the ability to make arms grow out of nowhere. Never before had she been made to feel so weak and useless. "Snappy, aren't we?" said her captor when Kuina tried to bite the hand that was around her mouth. "I don't know who you are or why you are interfering, but it seems you're quite the ruthless type yourself. And judging from what you did to my employees down there, you're too dangerous to be left running around." Kuina gritted her teeth, despite the pain. She couldn't, no, she wouldn't be helpless here. There had to be some way to get free of this inhuman grasp. She wasn't going to lose to the likes of that woman, devil fruit or not. "Well, since I've already bent Alabasta's greatest warrior into submission." Here she gave a rather self-satisfied chuckle at her own joke. "Let's exercise some creativity with you, shall we? Let's see. Oh, I have it." "Enjoy the trip down." It took Kuina one horrified moment to understand what Vice President All Sunday intended to do. The next thing she knew, the disembodied limbs that held her in that painful pose had, in a single coordinated movement, lifted her up and flung her backwards. Down the same flight of stairs that she had just dashed up. As she tumbled down the frightening expanse of empty space, her arms still restrained, she couldn't help thinking how unfair it would be if she, who had worked so hard and come so far, were to die from something so trivial, something so stupid, as falling down a flight of stairs. Dr. San? Toshigi poked her head cautiously into the door of the infirmary and was relieved to see the doctor sitting at his chair, looking exhausted, as he had every right to be. Please have some food or something to drink. You've been working non-stop. I could do with a coffee, in all honesty, the old man admitted. I thought as much. Toshigi opened the door the whole way to reveal 2 cups of coffee in her hands. A dark stain on her pant leg suggested that this might have not been her first attempt at bringing the beverage from the galley, though perhaps it was her first mishap less one. They sat in silence for a while, the doctor slowly sipping the contents of his cup. Should I ask about his condition? Toshigi ventured at last. The doctor shook his head. I wouldn't want to jinx it, dearie. I see. Shall we talk about something else? Yes, where did Kuina girl go? Toshigi's first instinct was to go into a rant about how Kuina had gone running off after the attackers without nary a thought to the consequences or her responsibilities, but the memory of the girl's parting words stayed her tongue. I sent her off on a mission, she managed to say at last, not knowing why she was covering for her hate discovery of how mistaken her image of the other girl had shaken her. To find Captain Smoker. I see. I supposed it cannot be helped. I'm rather surprised how well she seems to be handling this, though. Given her closeness to peers, I was quite concerned for her mental and emotional state, but it seems that she was quite composed and capable after all. That was what Toshigi herself had thought, and look how wrong she had been. You seem to be holding together pretty well too, Toshigi. That Smoker sure knows how to pick 'em. Guess you young uns are made of sterner stuff nowadays. Me? I'm getting too old for all this. Maybe it's time I retire and go live with my daughter. You have a daughter? Her name is Marie. Works as a nurse back in my hometown. A little smile crept into the doctor's face as he said this. Beautiful girl. Just like her late mother. Newly engaged to a man who works near her hospital. I was hoping to take leave and meet him in person if we sailed anywhere near Sabaody. Well, congratulations. I guess that makes her age around. A little older than you and Kuina. Did you know you're both the same age? I'd say she's the same age as Pi. With this he trailed off, the light going out of his face as the name passed his lips. There was an awful silence as the doctor put down his mug, suddenly tiring of the small talk, or perhaps the harsh reminder it had presented. Well, thank you for the coffee, Toshigi dear. I should be getting back to work. The door to the infirmary closed behind him, leaving Toshigi to mull over what had been left unsaid. The same age as Piers. The line of her mouth curled downwards. Far too young to die. When she came to, Kuina slowly became aware that she was being cradled in a pair of arms. In fact, she was being nestled rather unnecessarily closely to that someone, who appeared to have very heavy breathing. Gah! In a panic at her state of vulnerability, Kuina began frantically thrashing around for her sword. The someone nearly dropped her in shock. Ah, said he, on recovering his composure. You're awake, my lovely lady. It was him. The pirate. Why was she being carried around by the pirate? What happened? It's you, the pirate. Why are you carrying me around? What happened? Well, you see, the pirate said, setting her down. I was running around looking for these friends of mine when I came across you, lying unconscious back there. And I couldn't just leave you there, so I picked you up. Her expression must have been one of shock, for he broke off and immediately tried to reassure her that his intentions were entirely honorable and no, he truly hadn't been planning to take advantage of her. Was planning to drop you off somewhere where you could get some medical attention before going to look for my friends again, honestly. Stairs. Again. At least she hadn't broken her neck this time either. She supposed it was her last moment reaction of tucking her chin to her chest and attempting to hit the ground rolling that had saved her, even if the impact did knock her out. Inwardly she wondered if there was a heavenly scoreboard somewhere that read stairs. 2, Kuina. 0. Or maybe it should have read stairs. 1, Kuina. 1, since she didn't seem to have lost anything major in this rematch other than her pride, and her sword. Speaking of which. Why? She demanded of her rescuer. Why? He repeated, puzzled. Why did you help me? That's what a gentleman does for a damsel in distress, of course. Then it hit her. The last time she'd been after the pirate she'd been dressed as a marine. And now she was in the kimono and with the makeup, he probably didn't recognize her. I also couldn't help noticing, you called me, you, just now as if you recognized me. Have we met before? His thoughts seemed to be traveling along the same lines as hers. Kuina was torn between fabricating a lie and coming out and telling him she was the same marine who tried to capture him earlier. But this man did not act in any manner of a pirate that she imagined, and the idea of playing him for a fool niggled at her conscience. She reminded herself that this was a member of Straw Hat Luffy's crew she was addressing. It was at this point when the pirate, who appeared to have been looking closely at her and muttering a series of numbers, which seemed to be coming in sets of 3, suddenly started and said, in a somewhat ironic echo, "It's you, the marine swordswoman." He'd figured it out. "Yes," she said shortly. "I'm the one who was after your captain, Straw Hat Luffy." You. That uncouth, mannerless oaf. He wasn't the one who knocked you out and left you lying there, was he? What was this? The man was expressing disgust at his own captain. What was going on here? Wait. Kuina said slowly. Who are you, really? You don't act like a typical pirate. She could hear him start breathing heavily again, as if he were quite excited. A lovely lady expresses interest in me? Bellarine. This lasted briefly, before he regained his composure. You may call me Mr. Prince. Prince. Straw Hat Luffy's leer was both mercenary and calculating as he took in the desperate princess and her equally desperate plea. So, you want me to help you save your country, princess? But it has not escaped your notice that I am a pirate, has it? I don't care. Name your price. I'll give you treasure equal to it from the royal treasury itself. But please, help my country. Straw Hat threw his head upwards and laughed mockingly. Dead gems and cold gold. Do you really think that's what I want? I assure you, I am no common pirate, princess. My interest is in a different kind of treasure. What kind of treasure are you after then? Asked the princess, her composure calm in her negotiation. The evil pirate grinned. Crew. I don't understand, you have a crew. Yes, and they are not just any ordinary crew. In fact, I have put considerable time and effort into collecting how shall we call it? A designer crew. Not a pirate crew comprising of common riff-raff and low-life criminals, but instead a group of people from noble and distinguished backgrounds. All who would normally never be found gracing the decks of a pirate ship. Look at those 2 guards for an example of what I have. That one is one of the most gifted swordsmen ever to graduate from the most ancient and honored dojo of the East Blue. And that rather dashing-looking one is in fact a crown prince, from one of the kingdoms I have had the fortune to subdue. Straw Hat leaned back in his chair and put his hands together gleefully. Now that I have started adding royals to my collection, I would very much like to balance it out with the addition of a desert princess. Do you get my drift now, Princess Nefertari Vivi? Why? You want me to become part of your crew? No. I can't just sail off. I have responsibilities, I need to save my country. Now, princess. I am not an unreasonable man. I will help you save your country from the rebellion. In return, you promise me that once all is well in your home country, you will say your goodbyes and willingly sail away as an obedient member of my very fine, very classy crew. Your type of royalty will keep your word, I'm sure. Or you can refuse and let your countrymen tear themselves apart. I don't mind that either way. I have no choice. No you don't. Do we have a deal? Minutes later, the guard who was once a prince led the princess to what would be her quarters. Prince, how can you bear it? Sobbed the princess. I bear it because I must, said the noble prince. But have no fear, dear Princess Vivi, for we who suffer under that tyrant's rule have a plan to win back our freedom. Hope dawned in her face, like the dazzling night stars in the desert sky. A plan? Yes, we have a plan, said the prince, the stars crowning his head where his real crown should have been. Will you trust me? I will trust you, said the princess to the prince. Somehow, her earlier suspicion true. For some reason the Straw Hat Pirates appeared to comprise of otherwise respectable individuals who must have been blackmailed into joining the crew. Was it possible that the men under Straw Hat resented him and would jump on any chance to be free from his tyranny as well? And more importantly, could she, Kuina, find a way to take advantage of this resentment? Are you just like that other girl, the Princess Vivi? She asked the prince. Huh? What do you Wait, you know Vivi? Do you know where she is? I encountered the princess earlier. She was captured by a woman with a strange ability. The princess called her Miss All Sunday. She was taken to somewhere called Rain Dinners. Mr. Prince was silent for a while. My poor Vivi Swan, I am coming. With this he turned and began to move, when she called out to him again. Prince San. Wait. Tell me the truth. Are all of you under Straw Hat? Are you all trying to overthrow that evil pirate yourselves? Does it have something to do with what's going on in this country, and that criminal organization, Baroque Works? Sanji started. You seem to know a lot, miss. My name is Kuina, Kuina-kun. Asterisk, such a lovely name. Yes, it's true, first I'm a marine. But in truth I want to stop that evil pirate and Baroque Works as well. Please, let me fight with you. This seemed to send the prince into further transports of delight. I would be honored to fight alongside Kuina-kun. And as it turns out, I do have a plan. Are you quite done, Miss Wednesday? Crocodile drawled as he took another sip of wine. The way he said it, anyone would have thought he was asking if the princess was done with dinner, not her repeated attempts to behead him with her jeweled slashers. Smoker had been surprised to recognize Crocodile's helper when she had entered with the defiant princess in tow. Nico Robin. She had been one of the highest bounty heads in her time. Well, for one so young anyway. What was she doing here in the service of that man? Was that how she had managed to elude capture for so long? All this was running through the Marine captain's mind as they witnessed the sadistic warlord forcing the girl to choose between escaping or freeing her accomplices by retrieving the key to the cage. An impossible task for her, as he had deliberately dropped it into the cage of giant banana crocodiles. Plucky and determined she might be, it was pointless to hope for her to fight the creature and win. Beside him, Roronoa had his sword in hand and had unwedged its habaki, but Smoker knew that the weapon would be useless in getting them out, and the famed swordsman was just as helpless as the rest of them. Outwardly he remained calm, but the observant bystander might have noticed that he was biting into his cigars rather viciously. Yes, sir. In front of the Rain Dinners casino. Right. All we have to do now is wait, said Sanji to Kuina, after he had knocked out the Baroque Works agent who had been forced to speak on the Den Den Mushi. Are you sure your friend will be all right, Prince San? Don't worry, he's very capable. He sounded a little young. He's really very mature for his age, Kuina-kun. Well, he really is a brave boy to be doing this. In the distance, a commotion could be heard as Chopper pounded on the last of the agents. That's our cue. Kuina nodded at him as her face took on a very demure, ladylike expression that nearly had him mellowrining in delight. Fortunately, everyone in the casino was too busy ogling at the august presence of the owner, the warlord Crocodile, to take any notice of the couple that had just walked in. Neither did Crocodile himself. He was too busy going after Mr. Prince, while issuing threats of death. As Sanji strode regally into the casino, looking absolutely snappy in fine suit and shades, he couldn't help grinning. Yes, his friends were in danger, and yes, they were going up against an insanely powerful Shichibukai who was likely out of their league, but hot damn, did it feel good to be doing this in style. Coming to their rescue with a gorgeously dressed woman hanging onto his arm. In fact, the only thing that could have made all this even better would have been if Zoro had been there to see him. 5 minutes later, on finding Vivi and learning what had happened to the crew, Sanji grinned once more. Kuina-kun had been helpful in sinking the bridge leading to the casino to delay Crocodile's return, and had managed to do it so discreetly no one was even sure what happened. You're that swordswoman from earlier, Vivi was saying to Kuina. Yes, you are the Princess of Alabasta, are you not? I'm a friend of Zoro's and I'm here to help. Thank you. Come ladies, we must be off to the rescue. This just kept getting better and better. In fact, the only thing better than making an entrance with a gorgeously dressed woman hanging on one arm was making an entrance with a gorgeously dressed woman hanging on each arm. Kuina had been quite astonished at Prince San's combat prowess. It was clear that in their previous engagement, the prince had been holding back by a lot. First there was the effortless way he had leveled the Baroque work guards, although upon reflection, she did have a recollection of him wiping the floor with the rest of her squadron. But when he had kicked that beast, which according to the princess was a crocodile of giant proportions, clear into the air, she was duly impressed. "That shitty guard was such a nuisance," said Prince as he kicked another giant crocodile across the room. "I'm just glad he had a sword on him, even if it is a cheap mass-produced affair," Kuina replied as she sliced the nose tip off another that had attempted to flank them. Fortunately, the curvature and weight of the swords the Alabastans used, which was halfway between that of a saber and a scimitar, was not too different from that of a katana, so she had gotten the hang of the weapon fairly quickly. "Save me some, Prince San." "Why are you calling him a prince?" came an irritated cry from the cage. "Zoro, why is the marine girl here?" A very panicky female voice was screaming from the same direction. Someone at least managed to see through her change of attire. "Good job, Vivi. Hey, who's the kimono-san? Nami Swan, do you love me? Watch out. More of the crocodiles are coming in," was the princess's panicked warning. Another crocodile was sent flying across the room in short order as the babble of voices got steadily messier and messier. "Kuina, get the third one that just entered the room." "Smoker Taiko, you're here?" Tashigi-san was. "We've been looking everywhere for you." "Never mind that. Get the third one, it has the key to this cage." Kuina decided that it was probably best not to ask how her captain had ended up in a cage. She was already going to have to explain later why she was in the company of a pirate. She really shouldn't be digging herself any deeper. Instead, she focused her efforts on getting the key out of the crocodile. She wasn't expecting that she and Prince San would have to resort to using the key made by the mysterious man who had been trapped inside the crocodile in the end, but this was honestly one of the least strange things that had happened to her all day. Smoker was glad to be out of the cage. Fortunately, the girl Kuina wasn't asking how he had ended up in it, which was a good thing. If any of the crew and in particular Tashigi or Briggs got wind of it, he wasn't sure if all the glowering in the world would keep them breaking down in laughter. Kuina seemed more concerned at having been seen working together with a pirate, and under normal circumstances this would have been a rather serious thing indeed, but at the present, there were more pressing matters to attend to. "Smoker Taiko, I know what you're thinking. I can explain. I found out something important about these pirates," began Kuina. "Explain later, we need to get out of here first." Crack. Those idiots. While he had been busy speaking to his subordinates, including the mysterious Mr. Prince, whom the hyper-aware captain noted had sensed Kuina's distress and was now tactfully distancing himself from her, had gone and slaughtered the rest of the crocodiles. And like idiots with no restraint, they had added so much damage to the already damaged underwater tunnel that it was cracking. Actually, it was collapsing. He had barely enough time to utter a single, heartfelt swear word right before everything was washed away and he was helpless once more. If he lived through this, he was definitely never going to hear the end of it. Briggs, in particular, would be sure to crow. Too late she remembered that Captain Smoker couldn't swim. Yes, she wanted to stop Straw Hat and save Zoro, but in this situation her priorities were clear. In the chaos of the rushing water, she did the only thing she could do: reach out and attempt to grab Captain Smoker before the water washed them all away. It was close, but just as the water swept her off her feet, her hand closed around an arm. It was limp and unmoving. A devil fruit user was rendered unable to move by the water. She held on tight and wished, with all her heart, that she had taken the time to improve her swimming. The water was everywhere. She couldn't tell up from down and she was being mercilessly smacked around along with the debris in the room. "If you keep your lungs full of air you won't sink." Unbidden, Pierre's voice echoed in her head. "Don't panic. Don't scream. Hold your breath and try to figure which way is up. Surely the pirates could swim. Where were they? Could she follow their sounds to find the way out? How could anyone sense anything in this mess? She couldn't hear anything that made sense. The water was distorting the sound too much and if she didn't find the surface soon she and Captain Smoker were going to drown." With an effort she fought down the urge to breathe. Seconds dragged on. Where was the surface? She was going to drown. They were all going to drown. She could feel her consciousness start flitting away as her air-starved mind began to give up. She was so tired. In desperation at her impending death, the voices in her head, previously suppressed, returned in full force. One moment, the underwater sounds had begun fading away. The next, everything suddenly became clear as she once again became acutely aware of the voices everything around her. Zoro, Prince San and the rest of the pirates had swum out through the breach in the tunnel. They had probably reached the surface by now. She didn't have enough air or strength to follow them. Her only chance lay straight upwards. No time to think. Just act. Reorientating herself, she began kicking towards the surface. Air had never tasted sweeter. Captain Smoker came to with the realization that he was lying on his back on the stone-flagged streets near the Rainbase Lake. He was soaked, which meant his last memory hadn't been some kind of sick delusion. Unbelievable. As the feeling came back to his limbs, he absolutely hated being submerged. He rolled over and coughed out the last of the water that had been in his lungs. Why did you save him, Zoro? Shut up, I didn't want to. Saved by pirates. Unbelievable. What the hell was going on? And where was that girl Kuina? Kuina reflected that this time, that accursed mantra had saved her life. She didn't have time to marvel at it, because it had also made her aware that the arm she had grabbed hadn't been Captain Smoker's. The person she had saved had been the strange wax man who had produced the false key to the cage. In her disappointment, she tossed him onto a rather floaty piece of wreckage before taking a moment to catch her breath and regain control over herself. The voices in her head were back, but to her surprise, they seemed easier to control this time around. As she forced herself to calm down and focus, she found that she could block out the presences of the people in the casino whom she wasn't interested in and focus on the ones she was after. She knew, with devastating certainty, that Captain Smoker had been dragged outside with the rest of the pirates. Normally she would have no fear for the captain. He would be more than capable of taking all of the pirates at once. But things were a little bit more complicated this time. First there was the whole forced servitude situation with Prince San and Zoro. And then Straw Hat was with them, which meant that the crew would have to obey their captain. Her captain, on the other hand, was currently helpless in the water, and if Straw Hat got it into his head that this was a great opportunity to get rid of the Marine. No. Not Captain Smoker. She had lost Zoro to that evil mastermind, but damned if she was going to let the same happen to her captain. Surely she could do something? It was then when she remembered she had a baby Den Den Mushi, which was coughing in disapproval after the soaking. Thanks to the virtue of Pier's drilling, she remembered how to use the little device. She dialed the number she had been given. Puru Puru Puru. Tashigi, Kuina. Captain Smoker. I know where he is. You do? Where? The lake. I tried to get to him but I wasn't fast enough and we both got washed away. What? He can't swim. He'll drown. I know that. You need to send some men to find him. Which lake is it? Where are you? I need a name, Kuina, or a description. What does that place look like? The Den Den Mushi took on a rather exasperated-looking expression. How should I know? How many lakes are there here? All I know it's under the casino. Rain dinners. Just get your men there. I need to go try save him now. There was a click, and the Den Den stopped transmitting, leaving a rather stunned Tashigi still staring at the snail. Excuse me, may I borrow your Den Den Mushi? The voice seemed to have come out from nowhere. The owner of the Nanohana telegraph office jumped in shock. He had been sure he had been alone in the empty office just a moment before. The streets had emptied in the wake of the madness that had been the king and his confession, and he himself had checked that the door had been shut and locked. Although he had left the window ajar so he could see the view of the harbor, he was very sure that if anyone had entered, he would have noticed. Especially if it was someone as tall as this man. He towered above the telegrapher by almost 2 heads, and his gaunt frame made him look even taller. He was dressed in what might have been a fine blue serge suit, had it not been suffering from multiple rips and tears in several places. How did you get what happened to you? Asked the owner curiously. The man's answer was flippant. Ran into a thorn bush. Nothing to worry about. Now about that Den Den Mushi? Well, actually, we're closed. It's an emergency, insisted the Outlander, for he was definitely not Alabastan, although he bore an air of experience and familiarity that was unlike the actions of those who had never been to the desert island before. The telegrapher shrugged and let him have the snail and receiver. What with their king turning against them and the royal army and rebels about to clash, the country was going to hell in a handbasket anyway. One call wasn't going to make a difference. Puru Puru Puru. Tashigi snatched up the Den Den Mushi, Kuina. But the Den Den's face had taken on a sour and harassed expression instead. No, it's Briggs here. Briggs, where are you? Nanohana. Telegraph office by the docks. I had to use their Den Den Mushi. The baby one I have just doesn't have the range. Where's Captain Smoker? Smoker-san's missing. What? Toshigi had to hold the Den Den Mushi about a foot away from her ear. Briggs had yelled so loudly. He went chasing after Straw Hat Luffy and disappeared. We haven't found him. There was what sounded to be a disapproving and furious sputtering on the other end of the phone. Running off without a word. They're the same, all of them. Toshigi could barely make out the angry muttering. I was Gomoker before I did a bit more snooping around. Hell, I was going to tell him not to waste his time chasing down those straw hats. They're just small fry, as in the real problem is going to be here in Nanohana. No. Make that Alubarna. As in the capital. The place is about to boil over with this whole rebellion thing, and I'm pretty damn sure it's no coincidence that that dodgy organization, Baroque Works, is involved. Wait, why are you telling me all this? Toshigi, I presume he left you in charge. Yes. Then tell me you haven't been sitting around twiddling your thumbs and panicking. I was getting search teams out looking for Smoker-san. That's a start. Also, I forgot to mention, this thing is bigger than what we first thought it was. Whatever is behind that Baroque Works organization, it's big. As in. They've got some seriously heavy backers. Make sure you leave a heavy guard with that prisoner we got at Runes, and make sure someone really strong is with them. As in that blind girl or yourself. Not that backwater fisherman. She could feel her stomach turn to stone. Too late. What's wrong now? Evidently Briggs could sense it too. The prisoner is dead. She gulped. We were attacked earlier and Officer Pierce was. Was he killed? There was a sharp tone from Briggs she had never heard before. Not quite. But it's bad. She could hear Briggs swear in language best left undointed. Damn that Smoker. Of course this was bound to happen. I knew it. You can't give a pair of knuckle dusters and a few lessons to someone like him and expect them to turn into a one-man army overnight. That backwater fisherman can't fight his way out of a paper bag. Tell me you at least got the bastards who did it? Well, Kuina went after them. Of course she did. Has she reported back? Actually, she just called to say she knew where Smoker-san was. Then be competent and send your men there. What the hell are you waiting for? I just got the info seconds before you called me. She was still in the middle of snapping out her reply. She heard a sudden disturbance in the background. What the hell is that now? That was definitely Briggs' voice. Briggs? She asked uncertainly. What's wrong with that ship? The sounds from the Den Den sounded as though they were coming from a distance from away now. She could still hear Briggs' voice, seemingly directed at the people in the telegraph office. It's going to plow into us. Take cover, shish. There was a deafening crash, and the sound of metal scraping against splintered wood and shattered stone, and then, silence. Briggs? What's going on? Briggs? There was no answer. In fact, it was clear there was no longer anyone manning the Den Den Mushi on the other end, because the little device stopped transmitting, yawned, and went back to sleep. The name of the plan was Operation Utopia. And with the precision of an elite strike team, the top-tier agents of Baroque Works had pulled off the first stage successfully. A false confession by an impostor of the king had been engineered before a town of witnesses. The rebel leader had been shot and the town set aflame, thus enraging the ranks of the already bloodthirsty rebels. And then, a great ship, with apparently no one at the helm, had crashed into Nanohana harbor, leveling a good portion of the docks. Later, the members of the rebellion would find that the ships had been filled with much-needed weapons and supplies for their war effort. Some called it fate, or a gift from an unknown ally to the rebellion. As with their timely, if unexpected, arrival, Alubarna would be sure to fall into their hands. As for many of the unfortunates who were caught near the docks and perished in the crash, they were just the first casualties of a greater war that was to come. On the surface it would seem as though the plan had gone off without a flaw, but in truth there had been some minor hiccups. Like the earlier witness who had noticed that Mr. 2 had the ability to copy the king's face, which in turn had necessitated some silencing to be done by the Mr. 1 pair. Which in turn had led to another minor hiccup, but this one was a little more puzzling. In fact, even after the encounter was over, and the two topmost agents had left that assignment and moved on to the next, they continued to talk about it. Damn it, that stupid Okama screwed up. We're lucky it was just a kid that spotted him. Mr. 1 was not pleased. Well, the kid and that other thing. "Never seen anything appear and disappear like that before," said Miss Doublefinger as she settled into the carriage seat. "Still, what do you suppose it was? A freak mirage?" Mr. One only shrugged. "I wouldn't worry too much. It was probably coincidental, it didn't get involved much, and we left. That boy was in such a bad state he won't be talking anytime soon, if he lives," said Miss Doublefinger. "As for that other thing, it doesn't matter. Once the Mr. Four pair get the job done, we're all set anyway." "You mean, after the Mr. Four pair are done, there won't even be anyone important left to make a difference," said Mr. One. The sun was low in the sky as the end of the day drew near. The proprietor of the inn, a jolly, fat ball of a man who loved watching the sun set over the desert, was sitting at the threshold of the door engaging in his favorite activity. The streets had grown quieter since the whole rebellion thing. But the land was old, and the innkeeper was confident that no matter what happened, the country would survive, civil war or no, life had to go on, after all, and in Rainbase, which lived in denial of reality, the war was a distant matter, something you read about in papers. He watched lazily as an exotically dressed young woman went stumbling past in some sort of panic. As she disappeared from sight and into the distance, he shrugged. Probably lost heavily in the casino and was rushing off before the creditors came a-hounding. This was a common thing to happen. What he did not expect to see next was a man, bloodied and limping, moving down the street. In fact, as the figure drew nearer, the innkeeper was startled to recognize him as none other than the Pel the Falcon, royal guard and greatest warrior in Alabasta. At the present he did not look very great, for his white and purple robe was matted with dirt and blood, and his painted face was likewise soiled. He moved as though he was in great pain, leaning heavily on his sword as he walked. But despite all this, the man moved with great purpose. The innkeeper also noticed that he had something tucked under his arm, and he was surprised to note that it was a parasol. It seemed rather out of keeping with his image of a desert warrior. "You are Pel, the Falcon, are you not?" the innkeeper called out. "Are you all right? Have you seen the Princess Vivi?" was the warrior's disjointed reply. "Not for years since her last public appearance," the befuddled man managed to say. "Excuse me for saying this, Pel-sama, but you look like you have been in a great battle, perhaps you need some help." The royal guard cut him off. "My condition is of no concern. If you have not seen her, perhaps you have seen another? With dark hair?" Here the innkeeper looked at Pel's own head of brown hair. Slender build, his eyes took in the warrior's compact frame, dressed in a long, pale, robe. The innkeeper wondered if white and purple could be considered pale, and with a painted face. All right. This was getting to be too much. Perhaps Pel-sama had had some sort of head injury. The warrior had said this seriously without any trace of irony, but the innkeeper couldn't help but wonder if this was meant to be some sort of trick question. Then he remembered. "If you meant a girl answering to that description, she ran past not a few minutes ago." "You are certain?" "Most certain." Fortunately, the person in question he was looking for could only be the woman he had seen run past earlier. "She went that way." He pointed in the direction she had G-prize. The wounded man, for the innkeeper could see now that the famed hero was indeed horribly injured, seemed to regain some measure of strength on hearing this, and was off in the direction faster that a man in his condition had any right to be going. He shrugged. This was turning out to be a rather odd kind of day. Kuina wasn't sure if she had heard it right. She'd run out of the casino. Fortunately, everyone was still too shocked at the collapsed bridge to pay attention to her soaked self. And after some difficulty in bridging the water to the mainland, had raced around the lake in search of her captain and the pirates. Roranoa, only to find Captain Smoker facing off against Zoro on the opposite side of the lake. "Why did you save me?" For a moment she was taken aback. Zoro had saved Captain Smoker. Hope surged in her heart. Had he come around at last? Was this the plan that Prince San had envisioned? Wait for the right moment for Straw Hat to be turned over to a powerful marine, so that they, the blackmailed crew, could be pardoned and freed at last? But Zoro's next words shattered it all. "Captain's orders. You don't have to thank me, it's just him being weird." Captain's orders? Captain Monkey D. Luffy's orders? The same Monkey D. Luffy who was the pirate also known as Straw Hat. She couldn't believe it. It made no sense. If she were an evil criminal with Captain Smoker in pursuit, surely she would have just let him die. Why would Straw Hat order Zoro to save Captain Smoker? Was this some sort of elaborate gambit on his part? Straw Hat's eyes glinted with greed. I have never managed to add a marine captain to my collection, he gloated. And one with such powerful devil fruit powers too. No, impossible. Captain Smoker wouldn't be vulnerable to that kind of mind control thing. He was going to overpower Straw Hat and their hunt from Logia Town was going to end here. Go. Only this time will I let you escape. It had to be a trick. Some sort of strange trick to get Straw Hat off his guard so that Smoker could take him down. But as she just dumbly stood there, she could sense the pirate's presences disappear into the distance. Smoker had let him go. She couldn't believe it. Why? What had happened to Justice? In the space of a single, terrible day, everything had changed. Every stable thing that had been her foundation and driving force had been taken away from her. Her friend, peers, her self-control, I couldn't stop. Her unwavering belief in herself that she would never lose a fight again. Enjoy the trip down. Her purpose of saving Zoro from Straw Hat's evil influence. And now even the aura of dependability that she'd always associated with her captain was gone. Her spirit defeated at last, she sank down to her knees. How could a single day change everything so much? She didn't move when the Marines, no doubt sent by Tashigi, arrived. They hadn't noticed her, and on recovering Captain Smoker, left the scene with him. She didn't move as the sun dipped lower and lower in the sky, turning the world around her into a landscape of blue twilight and red sunset. The one thing that brought her out of her daze turned out to be the same thing as last time, an unexpected human touch. It was from someone who had suddenly gripped her by the shoulder. She didn't have a sword on her, so in a panic, she blindly hit out at the person to make him let her go, but incredibly enough, he was faster than she and had caught her fist mid-action, preventing her strike. Peace. I am not your enemy. It was the man who smelled of feathers. She barely had enough time to be shocked that he had somehow survived, and was alive and talking to her, before he spoke again. Where is Princess Vivi? There was something about his single-minded devotion to his princess that impressed her. For some reason it made her want to be of assistance to him, stranger though he was. The princess had left with the Straw Hats, hadn't she? Slowly she pointed in the direction they had gone. To her surprise, instead of hurrying off in the direction she had pointed, the man who smelled of feathers just stood there. This is yours. It took her a while to realize he was holding something and proffering it to her. When she gingerly reached for it and the moment her fingertips made contact, she couldn't believe she hadn't realized what it was earlier. Koyajaku. Gladness brought warmth into her voice. Thank you. But she was speaking to the man's back, for he had turned to leave, and yet he was still waiting. We must help her. Are you coming? Said he at last. He was expecting her to come with him. Why? Yet, without knowing the answer, she got up and followed. He was taking a gamble by bringing that unstable girl along, and he knew it. But when you are about to face down a woman with such demonic powers, any kind of backup is preferable to having none. He stiffened. Vivi had to have come this way, but in the distance, all he could see was her. That accursed woman who had toyed around with them as if they were nothing but dolls to break, and whose abilities he would not underestimate again. She was standing at the edge of the desert, looking down at something, talking to someone he could not see. It was too good an opportunity to miss. Behind him he could sense the girl's presence. She had done a rather admirable job of following him silently despite her odd attire. The woman with the devil fruit ability, she is ahead. I will engage her. Wait for my hand signal, then attack. Pell instructed her as he prepared to re-challenge Miss All Sunday. He noted the girl suddenly looked anxious at this. And do not attack from the west. The sun is setting and will cast a shadow to where she is, alerting her of your presence. That was how you failed in your attack earlier. We cannot carelessly waste the element of surprise this time. The girl looked defensive for a moment before his words appeared to sink in, and then she just looked mortified. He got the impression that she was not used to have her fighting techniques criticized or corrected. Strange, from what he had seen of her sword skills he had expected that she would have known of something so rudimentary. It was then, when studying her face, when he realized something that he should have noticed sooner. Suddenly, her lack of awareness about the sun and shadows, and her earlier anxiety, started to make sense. Actually, never mind the hand signal. Wait until you hear me say, now, and attack. I will provide all the distraction you need to take her down. As you say, it was a good plan, but it was never carried out because of one unexpected complication. Minutes later, Kuina strained to hear the words that carried across the distance. A normal person would probably have not been able to even hear their voices, but having a sharp sense of hearing had its advantages. The man who smelled of feathers had yet to give the signal, and she wondered why it was taking him so long. Actually, she was also wondering why she was even following his orders in the first place, but the man had a kind of commanding presence that made one want to obey without question. Miss All Sunday's voice, while still arrogant, sounded slightly different this time around. Perfect timing. You can take care of this boy. In fact, one could say that she sounded a little kinder, and certainly less cruel. The longer the man who smelled of feathers stood there facing off the dangerous Miss All Sunday, the less chance they had of taking her down. Why was he persisting in not attacking? That boy is the gallant knight who escorted your princess safely home. And he also stayed behind to fight a warlord so that his companions could escape. There was someone else lying there. A very heavily injured someone else. Who was it? Surely not Zoro, or even Prince San. Nearly getting killed so that the others could escape sounded exactly like the idiotic kind of thing they would do. Or even worse, maybe Straw Hat had commanded them to stay behind, sacrificing his kin? I wouldn't advise trying to attack me. You are heavily injured enough as it is. It would have been the perfect moment for her to attack, but still, no signal. Instead, the man who smelled of feathers sank to his knees. She could hear the displacement of the sand, and let Miss All Sunday ride away. What was he doing? Girl. You can come out now, and please, help this boy. Kuina emerged from her hiding place and approached in slow bewilderment. She couldn't believe it, but the soft rustle of interlocking straws did not lie. Before her, helpless, defeated, and totally at her mercy, was the one she had hunted for so long. The notorious pirate known as Straw Hat Luffy.